Hi everyone, this is Ellen from Astrology Journal. I want to talk about the Gemini new moon. It's happening tonight at May 26th, 11:02 Eastern Daylight Time, so that'll be early in the morning European time. The basic theme that I see in this chart is the idea of taking a break from our daily grind, our daily routine, and getting a fresh perspective. So to the extent that we've really just been focusing in on what we do day in and day out, all that kind of stuff, it's about stepping out perhaps into some kind of new environment so that we can get perspective on our daily experience, on our lives, on ourselves, on all of that, and give ourselves kind of a breather. And get the perspective hopefully can kind of expand our horizons and help us see things in a new light and perhaps just bring in fresh new energy to our lives. The idea is stepping out into, what happens is when we step out into new environments, curiosity starts to be kind of come back online, right? Because we don't know things. If we're always doing the same thing every day, we lose our curiosity about what we're doing. And curiosity, I would say, is a really important piece of keeping us in the game of life, keeping us connected, keeping us interested in, keeping us enthused, all that kind of thing. The archetype or the image or the idea that I always get when I think about Gemini is the idea of the young child who's going out into the into the park, into the world or whatever, and they're just in awe and wonder of everything around them. They're totally engaged, and they're curious, and they're pointing things out, and they're splashing in the water, and they're just full of joy and wonder and awe. So that to me is kind of the highest potential of Gemini, and it's this curiosity that just naturally guides us into life and helps us start to have our relationship with life in a way that is enlivening instead of deadening. So in this new moon chart, Mercury, which rules Gemini, is conjunct the new moon. And Mercury also rules Virgo, and Virgo is this idea of day in, day out, our daily routines. We need those. There's not a problem with those, except if they become every single day, that's all we do, and we never give ourselves a breather from them. So it's this energy of this Gemini new moon, to me, speaks to this idea of giving ourselves a breather, taking a break from our routines so that we can get perspective, so that our souls and our beings can regenerate and revitalize. That's the idea that I get. The Sabian symbol for the new moon at 6 degrees of Gemini, it's actually 7 degrees of Gemini. So 0 to 1 degree is the first degree of a sign. 1 to 2 degrees is the second degree. And so 6 to 7 degrees is the 7th degree of the sign. So we look up 7 degrees and we get an old-fashioned well, James Burgess. And that's interesting. It's the idea of water and replenishment, and it's always there. An old-fashioned well, you get the sense of something that's just tried and true and dependable and there, and it's just reliable. Nature is always there. We can always go out in nature, somehow, some way. We can, if we don't have any gardens or places we can go to, we can always look up at the sky, something like that. So it's just something that's steady, that's always there, that we can count on, that's reliable. That's the imagery that comes through for me, and it refreshes us, it hydrates us, it nourishes us, it waters us. So I think that's what I would come away with that. And then for Mercury, the Sabian symbol at 3 degrees of Gemini is the Garden of the Tuileries. And so that's an interesting symbol. I looked it up online. I didn't know anything about it, but the Garden of the Tuileries, I guess, is a big public garden next to the Louvre in France. And it was originally created by, or Catherine, one of the royalty, originally had it built or created or installed or whatever, however you want to say that. And she did so because her husband died, I think it was Henry II, and she wanted to leave where she was, and she had this built. And so you can think about having a garden a garden created as a way to give yourself solace and to kind of keep you in touch with life while you're going through a challenging time, while you're processing wounds. So it can come in handy there. I want to take a step back and look at the bigger picture because I just talked about this idea of wounds, which usually comes up when I do readings. Because that's a lot of the focus of my life. I'm working to heal all that. So anyway, Neptune. So Neptune, the way that I'm starting to read the chart is Neptune I'm seeing as the foundation, the first thing we want to understand. It is the spirit. Pluto is the soul, and so that's the next thing we want to understand. It is issuing forth from spirit. And then the moon is the part of the ego identity that is issued forth by the soul so that we can experience life in a particular incarnated form, in the particular incarnated form that we're in right now. So this is based on the idea that I learned in evolutionary astrology, or the method that I learned in evolutionary astrology, but they don't actually start at Neptune, they start at Pluto. So they see Pluto as the soul, that's the base beat, the ground of the rest of the chart. In order to understand the rest of the chart, you have to understand Pluto. And then they see the moon as our egoic selves, and that they see that indeed that as what is issued forth from the soul, so that we can have these incarnated experiences. But I think that the soul, it's better to think of the soul as issuing forth from Neptune, and Neptune is in the chart, so why not think about that first? So we have this idea with Neptune at 1-2 degrees of Aries as this idea of a comedian entertaining a group. And so that's this idea. I talked about this a lot in the Saturn ingress into Aries chart, so you can listen to, or reading, so you can listen to that video if you want more of my thoughts on that. But the idea that I was thinking about is that humor is a tool, a helpful tool for us on the path of life. Aries is about our vitality, the vitality that is naturally within us, that sort of impels us or compels us to take action, in our lives and in the world. And so we can think of humor, we can think of this idea of a bubbling life force, right? There's this idea of lightness to it and joy to it that's just inherent within us. And to the extent that humor is in alignment with that, then I think it's a positive, helpful thing. But if we get jaded by life and our humor starts to express as cynicism, as negativity, as cutting other people down, for example, that sort of thing, then to me that would be a symptom that we are out of alignment with our life force. And so it's a signal, it's a sign, it's a helpful sign that we might maybe want to see, can we get back into alignment with our life? What is that cynicism? What is that negativity? What is the wound that it's covering up? So we might want to take a look at that. Interestingly, Pluto, the Sabian symbol for Pluto is at 3-4 degrees of Aquarius, is a Hindu healer. So we have this idea of healing. So on the one hand, humor can help us heal. So Pluto can be benefiting from where Neptune is, or Pluto could be helping us go into the depths to see that our humor is out of alignment with our life force, and we can bring that back. So, and so we can start to do the work to kind of get ourselves more in alignment with our life force. So that gives us a context for understanding Mercury, the garden of the two Leos, for example. In order to get that perspective, to understand, it might help us to take a break from ourselves, to give our minds a rest and to see what comes through, what insights, what perspectives, whatever, or just, what comes up when we take a break from our daily lives, from our mind, from our habitual thoughts, from all of that. And what starts to come through, what starts to show it to us, to ourselves, what starts to reveal itself to us. So to me, the idea of the Garden of the Two Liers is this idea of taking a breather, taking a break, going out into nature if we're able to do that, or whatever would be a joyful place for us, and doing that. I looked on Wikipedia. The Garden of the Two Liers has a really interesting history. So it started out as a place of, I would say, a place of refuge for Catherine. I don't know who Catherine was, but she was a queen or royalty or whatever. And sorry, I don't know French history. No offense, France. But then it sort of it went through different permutations and morphs. Currently, it's a public park for anybody to use, but at different points, it was kind of like a pleasure place for the nobility or a hunting ground for a king or something like that. So it sort of took on all these different shades. So that's another piece of Gemini, this idea that things aren't meant to stay the same, or things aren't likely to stay the same all the time. Depending on where we are in our lives, what we have available to us, we may actually make use of it in a new way, and that can help us keep our life force sort of engaged and interested, and us curious and alive. Changing things for the sake of changing things, that's probably not a good idea either. But it may be that it's time to really take a break and be like, ooh, what does need to change in my life? Something like that. So in this chart, Jupiter, and I'll just say that interestingly in this chart, there is this interesting triangle pattern that has a point at Pluto. So that is that idea of a Hindu healer. And it is in a trine relationship with Mercury on one side, and in a trine relationship with the South Node on the other side. So that, to me, suggests that taking a break will help us to get perspective on what we've known, on our past. The South Node has to do with our past. And so in getting perspective, that can help us get the insight. The perspective can help us heal. It can give us insight into our experience that can help us heal whatever parts are out of alignment, and we can start to bring those back into alignment. That's how I would see, that's one way that I would read that. That's coming to mind as I do this right now. And then there's this, I think this is a biquintile between Mercury and the South Node, and that's this idea of gifts and talents. So there I might ask, as these wounds are healing, are there any gifts and talents that are innate within us, that we have, that we haven't been making use of, that we've somehow, maybe we've thought we need to let those go. We can't, that's just tough luck. That's something like that. And maybe we can bring curiosity to these gifts and talents, or these interests, we could even say. So that might be something that's part of this lunation cycle also. So Jupiter is also in Gemini. It's been going through Gemini for the past year. So Mercury, Sun, and Moon are passing over degrees that over the course of this year, Jupiter passed over. So you could say that Jupiter, in a way, made the way for the Mercury, Sun, and Moon in their current transit of these degrees. Jupiter is the ruler of Sagittarius, which is exactly opposite of Gemini. So where Gemini is, all the information, our immediate environment, all the pieces of the puzzle, that sort of thing. Gemini is and we can say that Mercury, Gemini is all the different perspectives. Jupiter is the higher perspective that helps us make sense of all the different pieces. So getting out into nature, as just one example, can be one way to help us sort of remove ourselves from our immediate environment and give us a breather and give us a perspective that we need to just kind of keep our life filled with vitality and curiosity and interest and all that kind of stuff. The Sabian symbol for Gemini 2627 is a gypsy coming out of the woods. So that's sort of the opposite. She could be coming out of the woods into a meadow, actually. But the imagery that comes to mind here is that somebody has been raised in a certain environment. That's the environment they know. And for whatever reason, she's coming, or I'm assuming it's a she, it could be a he, that person is coming out of the environment they've always known, and in coming out of that environment, they see a different perspective. So it brings this idea of a different perspective in again. The idea of Jupiter is we leave our immediate environments and we start to go into new environments. We're interested in searching and seeking and getting perspective on what we were raised with to sort of complement it and fill it out for ourselves. So we go to foreign countries, we meet new people from different cultures, that sort of thing. And so we kind of mix it up a little bit. In doing so, we get a bigger, broader perspective of what we've always known, or at least what we've known right now, in this particular part of our lives. So that's the idea there. The interesting thing about this Sabian symbol for Jupiter, for Gemini 2627, a gypsy coming out of the woods, is that the Ten of Swords, Gemini, the third decan of Gemini has to do with this idea of the Ten of Swords, or is associated with the Tarot card, the Ten of Swords. And Biddy Tarot says of the Ten of Swords, painful endings, wounds, betrayal, loss, crisis. And frankly, I can't remember what that image is for that card, but we can just go with the words. So it's interesting to have that paired with Gemini, with a gypsy coming out of the woods. So there's a sense of, there's a wound underneath there. This person is coming out of the woods not just because they want to change, but something has compelled them to leave the woods, some kind of wound, whether it's a wound that others from outside the community have inflicted on the community, or a wound from within the community that was inflicted on this person and they're just needing to leave. However, whatever that might be, there's a suggestion of this idea of a wound underneath the motivation to leave the woods. So in a positive way, we can say that part of what wounds might do is show up in us the need that something isn't working for us where we are, and it's time to leave. And sometimes maybe that's been true for a while, but it took this particular experience of betrayal or wound or whatever for us to do so. And I'm not saying that, by the way, that I'm not saying I encourage people to leave their environments or whatever. I'm just saying that sometimes these are things that happen in life. And so we do have to sort of renegotiate, at the very least, our relationship with what we've always known, the environment that raised us, or the environment that we're in right now that maybe has suited us, but maybe it didn't, and we didn't realize that. Mercury is in a new phase conjunction with the moon. In other words, the moon is a little ahead of Mercury. So if the moon is our ego and Mercury is the idea of our early environment, that sort of thing, it's the idea of sort of starting out with a new blueprint in terms of our sense of identity. If we think about the new phases having to do with Aries energy and planting a new seed and starting afresh, this idea of starting afresh with a new identity. And Mercury is actually in a balsamic conjunction with the sun. That's the end of a cycle. And so the sun has to do with our vitality, just as Aries has to do with our vitality. The sun also, as ruler of Leo, has to do with our vitality. And Aries, it's more of the inner vitality that's welling up within us. And in Leo, it's more about us expressing that vitality outwardly and in creative ways, you could say. And so to the extent that we have been expressing in ways perhaps that are out of alignment with who we really are, then the energies are supporting us in letting go of that. And in the process of letting go, the energies are also supporting us in getting into alignment with our true egoic identity. That might be a way to think about this. Eight of Swords. So Gemini 1, this is interesting. So Mercury is in the first decan of Gemini. So a decan is 10 degrees. Every sign has 3 10-degree decans. So the first decan, the second decan, and the third decan. And the first decan, where Mercury is, and also where the sun and the moon are, actually, is 8 of Swords. So that is, according to Biddy Tarot, negative thoughts, self-imposed restriction, imprisonment, victim mentality. So that is interesting. So the degree that Mercury is traveling through within this decan is the Garden of the Tuileries. So again, this idea of we're us being out of alignment with ourselves in some way. That would be why we're having negative thoughts and we're restricting ourselves and we're limiting ourselves. So getting out of our regular routine, getting out of our mind, getting out of our heads, and giving ourselves a breather so that a new perspective can come in that hopefully can help us realign and become more curious again about ourselves and our lives and our surroundings and etc. So that idea comes through here too. And then it feels like, and I don't think I mentioned there is a T-square with Jupiter at the focal point. We saw this in the Saturn ingress into Aries chart. So it is in a T-square with the South Node and the North Node. So the idea of giving ourselves a greater vantage point, the idea of seeking beyond what we've known, that has something to do with our evolutionary trajectory. That, in theory, will help to facilitate our evolutionary trajectory from our past, from what we've known. We could say in this reading of Virgo, the daily grind, the everyday routine that we've just been in because it's what we know, it's what we do. So that, which has been really important and has helped us stabilize in our lives, so it's not a negative thing, but to the extent that it's become a grind, and to the extent that what the daily routine we've been doing is actually out of alignment with who we are, and out of alignment with our gifts and talents and all of that, then getting this bigger perspective can perhaps help us, realign, or get the perspective we need to maybe see, or even just to get the perspective that we need to see that it will be helpful for us if we can realign and begin the process towards that. And that then helps to move us, to grow in a new direction, to grow in greater connection, you could say, with Pisces represents spirit, with our higher selves, all that. So that is one possible way to read that. So there is one more thing that I want to talk about, and that is that Saturn is in a sextile with Mercury. Technically, depending on the orbs you use, we could say it's also sextile the Sun and the Moon. So Saturn's at 0 degrees of Aries, and Mercury's at 2 degrees of Gemini, the Sun and Moon at 6 degrees of Gemini. When I first learned astrology, the orb that the person who taught me used was 6 degrees for the sextile. So you could say that they're in orb, it's in an orb even with the Sun and the Moon. The sextile is this idea of opportunity, and the Saturn at 0 degrees of Aries. This is the first decan of Aries, and that has to do. This is the first degree of Aries for the Sabian symbol, and that's that idea of the woman emerging from the sea and a seal is emerging with her. And I talked a lot about that in the Saturn ingress into Aries video, so listen to that for more on it. But there is an opportunity, I would say, to everything that I've talked about so far. There's this idea of an opportunity to get back into alignment with our fundamental humanity, with our humanness, our human self, and our fundamental human identity. Each of us individually, and I think us as collectively too. Saturn is a societal planet. In traditional astrology, in addition to ruling Capricorn, it also rules Aquarius, which is the group. So it's the Aquarius is the individual, and it's the group, or the larger collective. So the other thing about Saturn is it's this idea of structure. So in thinking in terms of this idea of wounding and wanting to get perspective so that we can see things better, and because it's really only with awareness. Saturn is conjunct Neptune. It just came out of Pisces. Neptune rules Pisces. Both of these archetypes have to do with this idea of awareness. Saturn will be moving back into Pisces for a short while in September, and then it'll return to Aries for good in February of next year. So it's kind of getting a little bit of a taste of what it's going to be like for the next couple of years as it moves through Aries. So Saturn is about structure. As ruler of Capricorn, it's about the structures that support us through life, that we've created that can help support us. The societal structures, it can be government, it can be buildings, it can be, norms and rules and regulations, all that kind of stuff. And as I always say, to the extent that those are in alignment with what supports life, they're great. To the extent that they're out of alignment with what supports life, they're not so great. We are all born into these cultures and are imbued with them. So again, to the extent that they're in alignment with life, our own life force is supported and given structure, to help us grow, tall and strong, so that we can stand on our own. To the extent that they're out of alignment with life, they, distort our life force and they get us out of alignment with our life force. So Gemini is this idea of our early communities. Well, one of the structures, one of the institutions, Saturn, Capricorn institutions also, is our school systems. Are they really in alignment with what supports the child in growing, to its full maturity? Do they help the child understand who it is? Do they help the child get in touch with its gifts and talents? These are, to me, all really important questions to be asking at this time, at this particular really big transitional moment in time that humanity is going through right now. So that is something, so there is an opportunity, if we think about this theme of wounding, there is an opportunity as we step back and give ourselves a breather and get some perspective, we may start to see that some of the things that were and that had kind of carried us through life, and that we've continued to sort of guide our lives, they're actually out of alignment with our life force. So we may find that there's an opportunity to at least become aware of this and perhaps start making some shifts and changes around that. So I wanted to talk about that. And it doesn't have to just be our school systems, just this idea of our early environments. And not to throw shade on the people who raised us, to the extent that the traditions and cultures and all of that we, that they were raised with was in alignment with life, so they would be in alignment with life. To the extent that they were out of alignment, so they might have been out of alignment. And often we end up passing those misaligned traditions down, through the generations. And so nobody's doing anything wrong. It's just, we had to adapt. Everybody probably had to adapt to crazy circumstances. Neptune can be this idea of crazy, insanity, not like it just doesn't make any sense. Neptune is also highest being, highest spirit, but it's also, this idea of craziness. And so it just gets what I don't know if it's a real word, but enculturated. It just gets enculturated. That would have to do with this idea of Jupiter, actually. And so it can affect us, and we may not even realize it. A Hindu healer, Pluto has to do with this idea of genetics. I mean, it can get wired into our genetics, right? So this breathing space that if we're able to take it, if we're, if it's true, if this is indeed part of what the energy is and what we're feeling called to do, to the extent that we take it, then perhaps we'll get some, greater perspective on all this, and we'll start to see how it's actually impacting us. We may be like, I didn't realize I was doing that because, I didn't realize this was out of alignment with supporting my life force, or I didn't even realize I was doing that, or I knew I was doing it, but I didn't really understand what it meant exactly, that sort of thing. So all of these things might be coming into play. It depends, is this lunation or the energies of this lunation impacting your chart in any way? That will be part of what determines what you experience or not. And depending on where you are in relation to all of this, I talk from the perspective of healing because that's where I am in my life. So it may be that you are, the energies may be playing out an entirely different level for you, and that's wonderful and beautiful and perfect. But this is one perspective, and so I share it in case it's helpful for anybody. So the last thing I want to say, and I'll try to just be brief because this is something I could probably go on and on and on about, and it's not going to be helpful, but just this idea of just as we can take kind of a step back from our own lives and get kind of a breather on our lives and get a perspective on our lives, and whether that's right now, whether that's getting perspective on how our upbringing impacted us that we maybe weren't aware of, and now we're gaining some awareness. We can also see, or we may also be seeing more information coming out on in the collective about what humanity has been doing to children, what has been going on in terms of the powers that be, perhaps in children, whatever. And the powers that be can just mean people who have gained a certain level of status in the world, and so have a certain kind of amount of power and cachet, and they're not using that with integrity. Saturn would be integrity. They're instead using it to exploit Saturn and Neptune in a balsamic conjunction, so the end of a cycle. So we may be seeing ways in which humanity has been exploiting children, another layer of it. We've been seeing this slowly and slowly. I think it started with the child abuse scandal, sexual abuse scandal with the Catholic Church. And I think it's possible we're going to be seeing more and more. And that might give us a perspective on why humanity is where it is and why it can't quite get out of it. And giving us that perspective and that information and those pieces of information, we can get a bigger perspective that might help us all kind of collectively finally raise ourselves out of this level that's really been hard on us. There is an interesting, the Eight of Swords, Gemini 1, which is where Mercury, the Sun, and Moon are. So the interesting thing about that I was just talking about is that Gemini 1, the first decan of Gemini, is associated with the Eight of Swords. And I think I talked about this earlier and couldn't remember what the word picture was. What the image was. But I remember now, and it's the image of a woman. She's kind of bound up. She's standing. There's, I think, a bunch of swords around her or whatever, like stuck in the ground or something like that. And she's got, so her arms, she's bound up. Her arms are, tied with a rope, around her body. So her arms presumably can't move. And she's got, her eyes are covered over. She can't see. She's got a mask on covering her sight. And the message of this card, from what I've read so far, is that it seems like she can't really do anything about this, but in fact, she apparently does have power to do something about it. And so this perspective that we get, this taking a breather, and that giving us more understanding, insight about what's happening within our own lives, but also the larger human community in which we've been living, whether or not we're directly involved in anything that's happening or not. This perspective may help us, give us the piece of information we needed as a collective to finally pull ourselves out of where we've been as a humanity. It's almost like we've just been settled into this kind of murky places of humanity, and we haven't been able to rise above it. And perhaps the information that's coming out right now will help us to do that. So with that, I will end this. So thank you so much for listening. I hope there was something helpful for you. And if so, that's wonderful. If not, that's okay too. Just leave it behind. It wasn't right for you. And go find the people who are reading these charts in a way that is helpful for you. Okay, take good care. Bye.